Perhaps no event in history has inspired as many alternative theories as the assassination of John F. Kennedy. With literally thousands of books on the topic, each with their own interpretation of every detail, every member of the crowd, every frame of the infamous Zapruder film, sorting out the truth from the lies has consumed people's lives for decades. Today, on A Day in History, we're going to delve into the JFK assassination. We'll present the official version, then highlight the discrepancies in the story, present alternative theories for some of the major disagreements, and tell you who we think really killed JFK in Dallas that day. But before we do that, be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to our channel, and check out our other videos for more on CIA secrets, government plots, and other controversial historical events. And before we go deeper into the story, let's take a moment to explore a historical gaming adventure sponsored by World of Warships. Many don't know that in April 1943, JFK took command of a torpedo boat and saved his crewmen during the New Georgia campaign after their boat was cut in half by a Japanese destroyer. It became an important part of his legacy. This sense of naval action and strategic command is what you can experience with World of Warships. Each ship is designed based on actual blueprints, giving you an authentic feel of commanding historical US warships that played a crucial role in safeguarding supply convoys and winning decisive battles for the Allies. The game features detailed graphics and a variety of ship classes, including aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. World of Warships is a gateway to the past, where you can command war vessels, participate in legendary naval battles, and learn about the historical significance of American ships. You don't just play a game, you relive history. Available on PC and consoles. For our viewers, there's a special offer. Click the link in the description to claim your premium 80th D-Day anniversary pack, featuring 200 doubloons, 7 days premium time, 1,000,000 credits, incredible US warships like the USS Phoenix, and special D-Day missions. Now, let's dive into the official version of what happened on that fateful day in Dallas, Texas. We'll start with the official version proposed by the Warren Commission. President Kennedy was in Dallas, Texas on November 22, 1963, riding in an open-top vehicle with First Lady Jackie Kennedy beside him and Texas Governor John Connelly and his wife Nellie in the front. At 12:30 p.m., the motorcade turned left from Houston Street onto Elm Street on Dealey Plaza, passing the Texas School Book Depository on the right. Shortly after doing so, 3 shots rang out, fired by Marine veteran and former Soviet defector Lee Harvey Oswald from the 6th floor of the depository. One of those bullets struck Kennedy in the back and then went into Governor Connelly. Another bullet then struck the president in the head, causing catastrophic and fatal damage. Kennedy was rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital, where he was declared dead shortly after. His body was taken back to Washington along with new President Lyndon Johnson and Jackie Kennedy for an autopsy at Bethesda Naval Medical Center, which confirmed that 2 shots hit him, the second fatally. Meanwhile, back in Dallas, Oswald fled the depository, returned home to grab a pistol before being spotted by police officer J.D. Tippit, who had been given a description of Oswald from the scene. Oswald shot Tippit and then hid in a movie theater where he was found and arrested by police. 2 days later, on November 24th, Oswald was assassinated in turn by local nightclub owner Jack Ruby as he was being moved through the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters. The government quickly set up the Warren Commission to investigate the assassination, and after 10 months, they determined that Oswald had acted alone in killing the president. This conclusion was controversial for some, and in 1976, the House Select Committee on Assassinations re-examined the case and concluded in 1979 that JFK was probably assassinated as a result of conspiracy, and there was a high probability that 2 gunmen fired on JFK. Since then, there have been literally thousands of books, articles, documentaries, and more arguing other theories for the assassination, but this basic narrative is a good starting point. Before we work out how the president was killed, we must first ask why. Who would even want to kill the president? This being the Cold War, it's easy to point the finger at either of the US's main communist concerns at the time, the USSR and Cuba. Certainly, the Cuban Missile Crisis under JFK's watch was the closest both sides came to nuclear annihilation, and both enemy powers got up to all sorts of shady things. However, both Moscow and Havana were quite warm to Kennedy. Khrushchev respected him, especially for his moderation during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And even Castro accepted that Kennedy was an enemy to whom we had become accustomed. Kennedy actually departed from much of the US leadership in his conciliatory approach to the Cold War. It is difficult to see how the USSR or Cuba would gain anything from his death, and the risk of being implicated in it would have been catastrophic. Instead, skeptics point the finger at others in the US government. They argue that Kennedy's actions angered the powers that be who decided to eliminate him. Chief among these were the CIA, whose failures in the 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion led Kennedy to fire the director Allen Dulles, a man who would later become part of the Warren Commission that claimed to debunk any conspiracy around his death. JFK also put a stop to the infamous Northwoods plan of false flag attacks on US citizens to justify an attack on Cuba. JFK seemed to consider the CIA dangerous and uncontrollable, reportedly saying that he wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind. Others point to the US military more broadly. At the time, Kennedy was resistant to escalation of US troops in Vietnam, and it's claimed by some that the military-industrial complex offered him to make way for war. Among the other people implicated by one theory or another are the Federal Reserve, citing Kennedy's Executive Order 11110, which would have limited the Fed's power, or even to LBJ, who some claim was going to be kicked off the ticket as JFK's running mate in 1964, and wanted to ensure he stayed in power. It is true that Kennedy's policies conflicted with some of his advisors. However, the conflicts have often been exaggerated. LBJ proved just as reluctant to escalate things in Vietnam, and it took almost 2 years for him to approve sending significantly more troops in, so the change in leader hardly accelerated things on that front. The claim that JFK had made an enemy of the Federal Reserve is also shaky. Executive Order 11110 was more a technicality than anything else, and he took other actions that arguably made the Fed more powerful, not less. Additionally, JFK denied rumors that he was going to replace LBJ in 1964, and in fact, he was in Dallas on that day as part of a tour to drum up support in LBJ's home state, which seems odd if he was about to insult all of them by dropping his Texan running mate entirely. Even the conflicts with the CIA can be pushed too far. JFK approved many nefarious CIA plots, such as countless assassination attempts on Castro, and the famous quote about him wanting to splinter the CIA was only attributed to him by journalists years after his death. So, while JFK did see some conflict with others in the government, the evidence for a massive rift that could motivate people to kill him is quite shaky. But what about Oswald himself? What motivation would he have to kill the president? And was he connected with those in the US government who wanted to do the same? Oswald was a Marine veteran who served as a radar operator in Atsugi Air Force Base in Japan, where the CIA operated their U-2 spy plane program. He was a decent marksman, but faced several disciplinary issues for getting into fights before he defected to the Soviets in 1959. He remained in the USSR for just over 2 years, where he met his wife Marina, but apparently became disillusioned with life there and moved back to the States in 1962. Oswald did come to the attention of US and Soviet intelligence at this time. the KGB assessed him for potential use when he arrived in Russia, but documents show they decided Oswald was too unreliable. He was emotionally unstable and generally incompetent, something borne out across his life from his marriage to his short-lived jobs. In 1960, his name even crossed FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover's desk as a known defector, which led the CIA to open a file on him for monitoring purposes. There are allegations that Oswald had knowledge of the CIA's U-2 spy program in Japan and passed that knowledge on to the Soviets, but such an action or even Oswald's knowledge of the U-2 program have never been proven. Upon returning to the US in June 1962, Oswald lived in several places and held several short-term jobs. He also became friends with a man named George de Mordenschild. Mordenschild is one of the more enigmatic characters in the whole affair. A Russian-born man with some plausible connections to intelligence agencies, he was aware of Oswald's past as a defector and allegedly asked his FBI and CIA sources about Oswald and was told he was a, quote, harmless lunatic. Oswald listed Mordenschild as one of his closest friends, but theorists have argued Mordenschild was actually Oswald's CIA handler. The claim that Oswald was a CIA agent after his return in 1962 is dubious to say the least. No evidence of such has shown up, and every bit of evidence on Oswald's character suggests he'd be a poor option for spy work. There's also the fact that Oswald had about $200 to his name at the time of the assassination and didn't even own a car. If he was an intelligence asset, he was never paid for it. Later in his life, Mordenschild denied the CIA handler claims, but did insist that Oswald was part of a conspiracy. Mordenschild's claims were widely circulated in conspiracy theory circles, but they often ignored the fact that Mordenschild was elderly and in mental decline by this point. He'd tried to kill himself on several occasions, had been admitted to a mental hospital, and told family that there was a Jewish mafia plot to assassinate him. He also made many demonstrably false claims, such as that he was in Dallas with Oswald on the day of the shooting when he was actually in Haiti. None of these conspiratorial claims were made when he was interviewed extensively by the Warren Commission in 1964. That's not to say Oswald had no suspicious background though. Oswald remained a loyal communist upon coming home and joined the Fair Play for Cuba Committee in Dallas. He was even arrested in September 1963 for fighting with anti-Castro activists, but was released without charge. Most informative was what happened with vocal anti-communist activists and retired General Irwin Walker. On April 10, 1963, someone fired shots at Walker in his home. No one was hurt, but the police could not find the perpetrator. That was until after the JFK assassination, where bullets from the Walker shooting were matched to the same rifle allegedly used to shoot JFK. Oswald's wife later admitted that Oswald confessed to trying to kill Walker, but had failed. Records also showed that Oswald had bought the rifle a few days after Walker grabbed national headlines for one of his anti-communist speeches. Oswald has also written his wife a letter before the attempted Walker shooting, instructing her to tell people that he had done it. Apparently, Oswald wanted to make a name for himself by gunning down the anti-communist Walker. These aspects of Oswald's past help us establish some important things. First, that there is no credible evidence that Oswald was ever an agent of the KGB, CIA, or any other intelligence organization. Secondly, that he had a record of violent or unstable behavior which would make him an odd choice for a grand secret conspiracy. Third, he maintained a deep commitment to communism upon returning to the USA. And most importantly, that he had already tried to assassinate politicians with the exact rifle he allegedly used to kill Kennedy. Oswald's past therefore gives strong support to the theory that he acted alone in shooting JFK. However, it's not so simple. Many alternative theorists have questioned whether Oswald was the only shooter, or if he even was a shooter at all. To engage with this, we first need to establish that it is irrefutable that 3 shots were fired from the 6th floor of the book depository. 3 spent shells and the rifle were found there, which were matched to the bullets found in Kennedy, Connelly, and the car. People in the building heard the shots above them, and eyewitnesses even saw a man matching Oswald's description firing the shots. This eyewitness description was the one that Officer Tippit was following when he approached Oswald before being shot. In combination with other evidence, it's also virtually certain that Oswald was the shooter on the 6th floor. Therefore, if there was another shooter, then it must have been in addition to Oswald, not instead of him. Also, if there was a second shooter, it follows that there must have been at least 1 additional shot on top of Oswald's known 3. Even if we had 100 videos, we still couldn't cover every theory or debate about the practicalities of the shooting. To keep this video focused, we're going to deal with 2 specific things that tie into this idea of a multi-shooter conspiracy: the infamous grassy knoll shooter hypothesis and the smoking gun dicta belt audio recording that convinced the House Select Committee that there were 4 shots fired. So, we'll start with the grassy knoll. This little strip of land on the north side of Elm Street, on the right of the motorcade, has been the center of speculation for decades. It's from this piece of land that the iconic Zapruder film was shot, and it is from here many conspirators argue another shooter fired upon the president. We're going to tackle 3 key pieces of evidence for the grassy knoll shooter theory. 1. That people heard shots coming from the grassy knoll. 2. That people saw smoke from the knoll which could have come from a gunshot. 3. That Kennedy's visible reaction to the shots could only have come from a shot from the knoll, not the depository. The first one sounds compelling. Several ear witnesses said the shots sounded like they came from the knoll. This originally included Abraham Zapruder, who said the shots sounded like they came from behind him as he was filming, though he later recanted this claim. In fact, of those witnesses who could identify the direction of the shots, most of them said they came from the knoll and only 40% from the depository. That's pretty compelling evidence, but not as compelling as you might think. 2/3 of the witnesses on the day could not determine what direction the shots came from at all. Dealey Plaza produces massive echoes that make it hard for most people to place sounds like a gunshot. More importantly, of the 174 witnesses interviewed in one study, only 4 of them reported shots coming from multiple locations. Nearly everyone who could identify a direction were adamant that every shot came from that same direction. Given that we know 3 shots were fired from the depository, something is clearly wrong with these claims. This sort of confusion is well known to acoustics experts. A number of studies have explored the acoustic characteristics of Dealey Plaza and other things relating to gunshots, and concluded that the ear witness testimonies are generally unreliable, and that various known phenomena explain why people misheard things on the day. If you want a full explanation, feel free to check the source in the description. But in his thorough paper on the acoustics of the assassination, Dennis McFadden explained why people heard different things on the day. For example, certain conditions make it so that people perceive sounds coming in front of them as coming from behind them. And the people on the knoll who reported shots behind them were perfectly positioned for that exact phenomenon, known as front-back reversal, to occur. Throw on top of this other considerations, like the fact that a shot on the knoll itself would have been unmistakably loud for the people on it, in the same way that the people in the window below Oswald in the depository described the shots being so loud that they shook the building. And the knoll gunfire claims aren't nearly as strong as they might appear at first. Suffice it to say that the ear witness claims are not strong enough grounds to claim a grassy knoll shooter, and discrepancies between ear witnesses are explainable by acoustic experts. It has also been claimed that puffs of smoke from gunfire were seen on the knoll. An admittedly shaky video by journalist Dave Weigman in the motorcade allegedly shows a puff of smoke in a few frames, as the cameraman is running towards the knoll to take a video of the road. However, the video is very brief and low quality, and it is by no means clear that this is, in fact, smoke. Several witnesses have also been presented to support the smoke claim. One of those witnesses was Sam Holland, a railway worker who was standing by the triple underpass at the time of the shooting, and claimed to see a puff of smoke from the knoll and heard 4 shots. However, Holland's account also contains several inaccuracies, such as one claim that an agent with a machine gun stood up in the president's car, which visibly didn't happen. He was most likely mistaking Jackie Kennedy or the agent on the rear of the vehicle. 3 other railroad workers near Holland reported seeing something like smoke on the knoll, but all of them later described it instead as either steam or exhaust fumes from the cars and bikes. According to Gerald Posner, there was in fact a steam pipe situated between Holland's position and the knoll that could have produced the smoke he saw. A Dallas police officer actually burned himself on the same pipe while searching the area that day. Aside from Holland and the other 3 railway workers' dubious testimony, no other witnesses at the time reported smoke on the knoll, including those actually on the knoll or those with a full view of it across the street. Last, we get to the gruesome matter of the president's reaction to the shots. For obvious content reasons, we can't show you graphic images, but we're sure most of you have seen the footage. One of the few unquestionable things about the JFK assassination is that he suffered at least one catastrophic head wound around frame 313 of the Zapruder film. JFK's head movement in those moments strikes many observers as unusual. As the 1991 Oliver Stone film JFK derisively put it, he goes back and to the left, despite being shot from the back and to the right. Theorists argue that Kennedy's motion is only explainable by a shot fired from his right, from the grassy knoll. This conclusion has been entirely dismissed by a range of experts. Contrary to films and video games, bullets do not generally carry enough force to knock people off their feet or jerk them around. Many people, when shot, merely drop to the ground, and those who do move are usually reacting in a muscular or neurological manner, not to the force of the bullet. Doctors and firearms experts have consistently noted that Kennedy's reaction is not a physics-based reaction to the bullet coming in from his right, but a combination of neurological reaction to brain injury and a physics reaction as the bullet exited his skull and caused an ejection of material. That's as much detail as we can go into without risking being demonetized, but suffice it to say that JFK's reaction to the fatal shot does not require it to have been fired from the knoll. It doesn't debunk it either, but it is perfectly explainable by a shot from the depository. If a shot didn't come from the grassy knoll, and there's no compelling evidence for a fourth shot from anywhere else, then why did the HCSA conclude there were 4 shots in 1978? At first, they didn't. The committee was finalizing a report that agreed with the Warren Commission's 3-shot, no conspiracy conclusion, when they were presented with a recording. This recording was a dicta belt recording taken from a Dallas police motorcycle on the day of the shooting. The committee was informed that the recording demonstrated 4 shots and there was a 95% probability that one of those shots came from the knoll. Dallas police officer H.B. McLean, who was riding his motorcycle in the motorcade, testified that sometimes the dicta belt recorders got stuck in the on position, which led the committee to conclude that the recording was genuine and from McLean's bike. It was this evidence, and this evidence alone, that changed the committee's mind from agreeing with the 3-shot no conspiracy theory to a 4-shot conspiracy one. As numerous analyses have since shown, this conclusion was wrong, and the recording not only doesn't show 4 shots, it doesn't record the JFK assassination at all. The dicta belt recording did not have audible shots, but impulses in the data that some people interpreted as shots. None of these are clearly audible to the human ear. Also missing from the recording are the sounds of crowds or the police sirens, which must have been there if the recording was of Officer McLean's motorcycle in the aftermath of the shooting. In fact, McLean was denied permission to listen to the recording before the committee issued its report. And when he was finally allowed to do so later, he was adamant that the recording was not from his bike. Instead, the recording did pick up what appeared to be church bells and even a man whistling, which would be quite impossible to hear over the crowds and chaos of the presidential motorcade. Crucially, it did pick up police radio chatter from after the shooting. However, this post-shooting radio chatter occurs before the alleged shots in the recording. Multiple studies have agreed that the dicta belt recording simply does not show what the committee was led to believe it did. Instead, it appears to have been from another motorcycle idling elsewhere in the city on the same day just after the shooting, probably at the Trade Mart where Kennedy was due to speak. This conclusion has been reinforced multiple times by panels of audio experts, including in 1982 and 2005. Given that this evidence was what changed the committee's mind, then it follows that the committee's conclusion of a four-shot conspiracy is not valid based on the evidence they had, and no new evidence has emerged to change that. This aligns with the overwhelming evidence from the people in the plaza. While it is true that several witnesses reported hearing 4 shots, at least 79% of witnesses reported hearing only 3. One analysis found that 88% of people reported 3 shots, and 7% heard less than 3, with just 5% hearing more than 3. No one claims that there were less than 3 shots, but there is more support for this than for more than 3 shots. Not only is there no evidence of a shooter on the grassy knoll, but there is no compelling evidence for any shots being fired aside from the 3 fired by Oswald. Even if one accepts Oswald as the only shooter, one might still suspect conspiracy after Oswald himself was assassinated by Jack Ruby 2 days later. Was Ruby silencing Oswald before he could expose the conspiracy? We'll start by looking at whom Ruby was. Ruby was a nightclub owner in Dallas. He was fairly well known around the city, but he was hardly a big shot or someone with powerful connections. The testimony from people who knew him was consistent. He was, in the words of one acquaintance, a born loser, a real low-level loser. Ruby was described as an impulsive, unstable, and not altogether bright man. He had a record of violent outbursts. He would regularly throw people down the stairs of his club, and in one case shot at a man while he was running away. Ruby also carried a gun at all times. Another thing about Ruby that people were consistent on was that he wanted to be the center of attention. He had dreams of being important, but lacked the qualities to make himself so. He was seen hanging around both Parkland Hospital and Dallas Police Headquarters in the days after the shooting, apparently trying to place himself in the middle of events. In the words of one associate, he was like horseshit, all over the place wherever anything exciting was happening. Friends and family also confirmed that Ruby was deeply affected by JFK's assassination. He closed his club and rang many friends and family in tears over that weekend. Ruby's character therefore fits someone who would carry out a dramatic, spontaneous act that he thought would make him popular. Amidst the grief that came with JFK's murder, slaying his murderer would be one way to do that. Further proof that Ruby's actions were spontaneous and not proof of a conspiracy can be seen in the events of November 24th. Oswald was due to be transferred through Dallas Police Headquarters at about 11:15 a.m. At that time though, Jack Ruby was in line at the Western Union across the street to send money to someone. His receipt for the transaction was stamped at 11:17. Only after that did he go over to the police station where Oswald entered the garage at exactly 11:21. Oswald's departure had been delayed by several minutes because he'd asked for a change of clothes. By Ruby's own account and all of the witnesses, Ruby only got close to Oswald seconds before he shot him. If Ruby had been even a minute longer in the Western Union, he wouldn't have been there to shoot Oswald. If Oswald hadn't asked for a change of clothes, he wouldn't have been there to be shot. If anything, from Ruby's walking speed to how quickly the cops moved Oswald through the building changed, the opportunity would not have been there. If this was a planned conspiracy, it was the luckiest conspiracy in human history. Much more likely is that Ruby decided to shoot Oswald in a spur-of-the-moment act. In his own words in the seconds after he shot Oswald, "I am Jack Ruby. You all know me." He wanted to earn his place in history, and his decision to do so was made in moments, not planned ahead of time. It wasn't a sane decision, but it was clear that Ruby was not a sane man. Ruby did later hint at a conspiracy, but not at some plot to kill JFK and silence Oswald. The conspiracy Ruby hinted at and talked about multiple times was a plot to frame and exterminate Jews like him. Over the following years, Ruby made various claims, including that LBJ was secretly a Nazi, or that Jews were being killed in the basement of his jail. "He is mentally deranged," his own sister later said. To be fair, Ruby was diagnosed with a brain tumor in 1966, which could explain his unusual behavior. Although it should be said, Ruby thought the cancer was injected into him by doctors, so who knows. But even before his unfortunate health issues, the idea that Ruby would even be picked for a conspiracy, let alone be capable of carrying it out, was refuted by basically everyone who ever knew him. He'd be the worst fellow in the world to be part of a conspiracy, because he just plain talked too much, said one journalist who knew him well. His own rabbi called him the last one that I could trust to do anything. Even the man who prosecuted Ruby in the murder case found himself defending Ruby's honor against accusations he was part of a conspiracy or organized crime. Ruby was not mafia. He was not a gangster. It's crap written by people who don't know the facts. As we wrap up our exploration of the various theories surrounding JFK's assassination, let's remind ourselves of the epic naval adventure from our sponsor, World of Warships. If you've ever dreamed of commanding a US fleet or epic battleships and destroyers that played crucial roles in decisive battles against the Japanese Empire and Nazi Germany, there is no better way than World of Warships. One of the standout features of World of Warships is its commitment to historical accuracy and detail. Each battle is influenced by weather conditions, and every ship is recreated with incredible precision. And with constant updates, new missions, and events, there's always something new to experience. Whether you're a history enthusiast or a gamer looking for a perfect combination of strategy and action, this game brings together the best of both worlds. Available on PC and consoles, embark on your naval adventure today. Join millions of players worldwide and command your fleet in World of Warships. Click the link in the description to claim your 80th D-Day anniversary pack, which includes 200 doubloons, 7 days of premium content, 1 million credits, and 3 special D-Day missions, available for a limited time only. Now, let's conclude with our final thoughts on who really killed JFK. We're conscious that this video is longer than our usual ones, and we've still barely scratched the surface on the sheer amount of JFK theories out there. There's all sorts of things we didn't have time to talk about, from the second Oswald theory to the questions of the autopsy to the so-called magic bullet. If there's interest, then we could always do another video on the topic addressing those parts of the shooting. But suffice it to say, our research on these topics brought us to the same conclusion. There was no conspiracy to kill JFK. For now then, we'll wrap up with a final point. The amount of contrivances, conveniences, and simple miracles needed for a conspiracy to work defy belief. The route of the motorcade wasn't even finalized until a week before the event, and wasn't published until the 19th. 3 days before JFK was killed. Oswald had been working in the depository since mid-October. The idea that any conspiracy could have predicted the route or placed Oswald there that far ahead of time is just false. If there was a shooter on the knoll, it depended on no one on the knoll noticing him, and none of the many cameras in the crowd catching him, neither of which any sane conspirator would count upon at a public event in a major plaza of Dallas, filled with potential witnesses and press. If there was a conspiracy to cover up the shooting, it required the cooperation or silence of the Secret Service, CIA, FBI, Parkland Hospital, the autopsy team at Bethesda, the Dallas Police Department, members of the Republican and Democratic Party, a whole host of investigators, journalists, and lawyers as part of the Warren Commission, and a seemingly endless list of others ranging from the manager of the book depository to the editors of the Journal of the American Medical Association. We like to think we've done our share of heavy lifting in criticizing the CIA and the US government in the past. We've never shied away from it before, and we won't shy away from it in the future. So, we hope you take that into consideration when we conclude that we don't see any compelling evidence that the CIA or any government entity conspired to assassinate JFK or cover up that fact. Most of the supposed witnesses for a conspiracy are not credible. Most of the alleged evidence is not convincing, and the practicalities of doing so are just not believable. Most of the claims for conspiracy are distorted, misreported, fabricated, or ignore the mountains of evidence which support Oswald's sole guilt. The reality is that the physical and documentary evidence overwhelmingly supports the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, firing 3 shots from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, which killed JFK and wounded Governor Connelly, before being shot himself by Jack Ruby in a crime of passion 2 days later. It might not be as exciting, it might not be as popular, but in the words of Gerald Posner, to say otherwise in light of the overwhelming evidence is to absolve a man with blood on his hands, and to mock the president he killed.